Okay, well, hello once again to those who've just joined us. Welcome to the Bow Valley Sustainable Building Summit. My name is Jodie Conwell, and I am a program associate at the Biosphere Institute of the Bow Valley, and I will be your host today. Before we get started, I just wanted to cover a couple of quick housekeeping notices. As webinar attendees, you will not be able to unmute your microphone or turn on your video. However, we do welcome active participation at these events. So if you have any questions for Dale as he moves through his presentation, please type them into the Q&A box, which is accessible on the bottom bar of your Zoom screen. Dale will be trying to answer your questions as he moves through his presentation. So if you have questions as they go along, as I say, please just put them into the box. There will also be a little time for additional questions at the end. If we have enough time to answer them, we will do our very best. I also wanted to note, if you experience any technical difficulties today, please email me at resource@biosphereinstitute.org. I will put that into the chat for you. Or you can message me privately using the chat function, and I will do my best to fix any potential glitches that we might come across. So the Bow Valley Sustainable Building Summit has been brought to you today by the Biosphere Institute of the Bow Valley and the Bow Valley Builders and Developers Association. The Biosphere Institute is a local Canmore-based charity that aims to address what we believe are the two major challenges affecting the Bow Valley today: human-wildlife coexistence and climate change. We do this through targeted education, research, and community engagement events. Our climate action efforts are managed under the Bow Valley Shift program, where we promote and empower residents and businesses to reduce their energy, emissions, waste production, and water use. The Bow Valley Builders and Developers Association is a membership-driven networking and advocacy group. BODA keeps its members up to date on issues impacting the industry and our community on municipal decisions. BODA luncheons, pre-COVID of course, have become the premier monthly business networking event in the Bow Valley, attracting 120 to 160 of the key businesses and political leaders here in the Valley. So today, we'd also like to thank our generous funders, Energy Efficiency Alberta and the town of Canmore, who have helped the Biosphere Institute create this event. A little bit of history. The Biosphere Institute spent 6 months in 2019 asking local businesses what it is they really wanted to learn about energy efficiency and how they wanted to learn it. The result of this was the Bow Valley Sustainable Building Summit. Unfortunately, due to the COVID pandemic, the decision was made to cancel the original in-person event back in April and take our learning opportunities online. So I would now like to introduce the keynote presenter for the Sustainable Building Summit, Dale Mikkelsen. Dale is the Vice President of Development for Simon Fraser University Community Trust. Dale and the Trust team are making significant and innovative contributions towards the creation of independent and universal green building standards to ensure a high level of urban design and environmental performance. Dale was a recipient of the 2015 Living Building Challenge Hero Award. This award is a recognition of the work the UniverCity team is doing to ensure the community, which will eventually be home to 10,000 people, has a full complement of social infrastructure and a low carbon central energy plant. So that's enough for me. Over to you, Dale. Please take it away.
All right, so hopefully this works. You can all hear me and see this screen.
Yes, thank you, Dale.
Okay, thank you. Perfect. Okay, so welcome and thanks for joining in. Presentation is called Building Community, Defining, Designing, Developing UniverCity. And it's really the story from inception to where we are today. And then later in this webinar series, I believe next month, I'll talk more specifically about some very specific green building examples, construction methodologies, et cetera. But this is the overview to set the table for really how you can define, design, and develop a market-based community that is also trying to set some leadership standards in terms of its sustainable building performance. And so we'll just walk you through that here. Please, as noted by Jody, interrupt. I've got my Q&A screen open so you can type in any Q&As you wish, and I'll try to answer them on the fly just to expedite the presentation. So if any of you have or have not been to the Vancouver region, what we call the Lower Mainland, this is a general site plan. You'll see in the orange in the top left-hand corner is downtown Vancouver. On the peninsula there, Surrey is circled in orange just to the lower right. Surrey is the largest developing urban city in Canada right now. So two major employment and habitation centers. And of course, we're bounded to the north by the mountains, to the south by America, and then by to the east by the valley and ultimately Alberta. And so UniverCity, circled in the top right corner with the orange and blue crest, is centrally located in this region. So its location is ideal in terms of densification, in terms of residential development, with families and homeowners living and commuting in multiple directions, as well as working on the mountain. So this is the top of Burnaby Mountain. So Burnaby Mountain is a quote unquote isolated mountaintop in the middle of the metro region. It was given to the university as a public piece of land for university development in the 60s. The ring road was developed at that time. You can see the ring road here. And Simon Fraser University over the years has grown out to be about 27,000 students on this particular campus, the Burnaby Mountain campus, 10,000 on the Surrey campus, and I believe about 7,500 students in their downtown business school and arts campus. So a rather significant post-secondary institution in the region. But you'll also notice that there's a significant amount of non-developed land within that ring road. And at the time, it was thought, in a sprawling campus model that Simon Fraser University could build out across all of these lands. However, in the 80s, they did a review of their master plan. They did a review of densification within their existing footprint, realized they could build an additional 2 million square feet on the footprint they're already occupying, and therefore understood that they had residual lands. In the 90s was also a time of fiscal restraint, government cuts, student tuition freezes, and loss of revenue for universities. So the university started looking at ways to bring other revenue to the campus. And a big part of that through the late 90s and early 2000s was the discussion of residual campus lands and how they could become asset value for the university, noting the location of the campus central to the metro region, and realizing there was an opportunity perhaps to introduce residential development as a, quite frankly, moneymaker for the university to fund many aspects of the university that we'll get to. And so what they did in the late 1990s is they hired a development consultant, architect, planner, and developer, Michael Geller, to go through a design charrette process. So they basically, and I'll flip back a slide, gave all of these highlighted colored areas to these charrette teams, these design teams. So the blue, the green, the red, the yellow areas, as well as the area that is seen as large surface parking lots, and said, go to town, show us how you can meet the requirements of the official community plan within the ring road. So the official community plan is something that was put forward by the city of Burnaby and ultimately allowed about 3,500 housing units on lands both in the ring road and SFU-owned lands outside of the ring road. Those numbers were derived from a suburban development model and would have taken up much of the acreage you see here. So through the charrette process, what happened is all three of the design teams independently, so they worked in independent design groups and then presented after 3 days to one another, had allocated all 3,500 of those housing units, and in some cases, groups had pushed up to 5,000 housing units on the east side of campus, primarily where the old surface parking lots were, where there was lands used for the storage of campus materials, and sort of the back of house of the campus area. and noted that if you could develop, rather than a suburban suburban sprawl style of development, but a medium density community, you would be creating a community centered around a 10 to 15 minute walk radius of a commercial center. B, you'd be building a community that supports the 27,000 students at university and perhaps even provides alternative housing for them, as well as housing for faculty and staff. And finally, what you would do is you would create a more sustainable neighborhood from a transportation and accessibility perspective. And so ultimately, the plan you see on the background was the quote unquote winning charrette model. And then what you see in the inset image is ultimately the final master plan as approved by the city of Burnaby. So further to this, as I noted, the conversation of sustainability started. So this plan, as you see in the top left-hand corner, and the charrette drawings were presented on the main mall of the university to students, faculty, staff, and residents that lived in Burnaby down the hill. And one of the things that came up over and over again was that this was not necessarily a bad idea. As a matter of fact, it was a good idea to build residential development on top of the mountain because it would increase the animation of the space, the 24-hour life of the space, and more diversity of housing in Burnaby. However, what a lot of folks, and this is late 90s now, 98, 99, were saying is, what about sustainability? What about the terms of the Brundtland Commission? And if this is an academic project as well as a money-making project, it should seek some form of learning component. So through that public feedback, it was determined that UniverCity would be created not only as a market model, but as a model of sustainable development. And within that, our 4 E's were developed: equity, environment, economy, and education. So for those familiar with the 3 legs of the sustainability stool, you typically have equity, environment, and economy. Given the connections to Simon Fraser University and the endowment that we'll talk about pretty soon, we added the 4th E, education. And as people like to joke here, typically the idea that 3-legged sustainability stool of equity, environment, economy, the notion is that if you underdevelop any one of those legs, the stool becomes unstable and eventually won't stand. So you need all of those components. We like to joke we added the 4th E just so that we could deliberately underdevelop any one leg and the stool would still be stable. So I'll talk about each of those in order and then relate them to marketability, market design, and constructability. So one of the big components about the development model at UniverCity is that UniverCity was not to be, so the SFU Community Trust, who I work for, was not meant to be a developer. The notion was to plan, build infrastructure, subdivide, and sell or lease land to market developers. So if the land was not desirable to a market developer or had no value to a market developer, it would not be able to offset the infrastructure cost to service the land, nor would it produce any revenue for Simon Fraser University. So while these ideas of equity, economy, education were announced at the outset, they were not to supplant the notion of making this a profitable community for Simon Fraser University. So those had to work hand in hand. However, the university did realize they would play developer when the project centered around social equity, social needs, or very specific university-driven needs, or they would do so in partnership. So housing in regards of equity has been managed in that manner. So we have projects like the one you're looking at here in its construction. It's now about 8 years old, the Verdun housing project. This was built by a developer, Vancouver Enterprises, that really finances and works on projects that have some form of equitable good in them and have a lower profit margin expectation in there. So what we did is we partnered with Vancouver Enterprises. We, at UniverCity and throughout much of BC on public lands, we lease lands. That's a comfortable model here. They're 99-year prepaid leases to developers rather than freehold market strata lots. That does have an impact on the ultimate selling price and the resale price of about anywhere between 1% and 5%, depending on the unit type, which does assist in affordability. And people, buyers, banks here are fairly comfortable with the 99-year lease model. So this land was leased to Vancouver Enterprises. for about 30% below the marketable value of that leasehold land. In return, Vancity Enterprises would strive to build one of Canada's first LEED Gold wood frame buildings. And it would sell all of the units to SFU faculty and staff on a priority basis with families with children first, and then sort of a trickle-down effect in terms of priority, also at 30% below market value, so that Vancity Enterprises could still make a 19 to 20% profit on the project, but proceed with the sustainable, equitable project. That project also has a covenant on each of the strata lot titles that requires the resale to be managed by ourselves, the SFU Community Trust. So ultimately, when a person moves out of the building, leaves the campus environment, is no longer faculty or staff, they bring the unit to us, they get it appraised through one of 3 recognized appraisal authorities, they pay for that appraisal, that would give them market appraisal, and then they just reduce the selling price by 30% of the current appraised value. So they've allowed to see market appreciation of their unit, and it goes on to the next generation of homeowners at 30% below current market value. We simply review that appraisal, agree to it or disagree with it, and then we send it out to our wait list, which is approximately 179 families. And then the top of the wait list typically takes the unit. So it's a fairly quick turnaround for the seller and for the buyer. We also really focus on equity in the locals first environment. So I'll speak more to our high street retail building or buildings. But really the objective there was to look at whenever possible to have local economy. So small, locally based businesses and services, Burnaby preferred, SFU related preferred, and then also looking at critical regional and national anchors in order to draw people to that community so they discover these other smaller local purveyors. So a big example about 6 years ago now was attracting our first grocery store. Nestor's Market is a very respected, well-known local provider, Lower Mainland provider of groceries. The community helped select this bidder. They gave us an idea of what kind of market they wanted in the community. And so ultimately 6 years later, this 23,000 square foot grocery store continues to thrive and really be the anchor of community in terms of working with community events, birthday parties, etc. Another component of equity is shared resources. Things are expensive to build these days. So noticing your surroundings, realizing you're connected to a major academic institution, a fairly progressive athletic institution, massive gym facilities, swimming facilities, climbing facilities, great library resources, et cetera, and realizing those are largely underutilized after 4:00 p.m. when folks are returning from work and have free time. So all residents, for example, are allowed to have what we call a campus card, which allows them either free or discounted access to all of these after-hour SFU facilities that are already there, thereby minimizing the need for the city of Burnaby or ourselves as the developer to build expensive and sometimes underutilized community facilities. So massive community facilities provided to this community. Equity also allows aging in place. So there's been a real focus on, once the community started being established, we moved from what we say building buildings to building community, and realizing that given the context of the place, the environmental conservation area around it, the propensity of mountain bike and hiking trails, that not only was this community attracting young people, academic professionals without children, but suddenly there is a large influx of children. And also a large influx of retirees to the community, liking the sort of the tranquility, but also the connection to academia and the comfort and safety this environment brings. And so really working on a community that has a really integrated variety of housing types, which I'll get to, which has led to needing to have substantial resources in childcare and other programming. So I moved to environment. Environment was one of the founding factors. In '99, when people said sustainability, they really were talking about environment. Burnaby Mountain is at the top of both the Stony Creek and Eagle Creek watershed. So there's a lot of conversation about water and how we manage water. Also noting that the Lower Mainland has a pretty intense annual average rainfall. And so a lot of conversations was using water as the catalyst to express the environmental story of UniverCity. So fundamentally, all homes at university are not connected to a traditional storm sewer system. And that was supported and innovated in partnership with the city of Burnaby. So ultimately, as we complete construction of each neighborhood, the city of Burnaby takes over these storm systems as a surrogate for conventional stormwater systems. So ultimately, every building collects all of its own stormwater, holds it in this cistern, uses it for on-site irrigation purposes, releases excessive flows into our quote-unquote community system, which is essentially a system of swales and underground ditches that we build instead of storm sewers that line the sides of the streets. And ultimately, those cascade down into one of three ponds that are creatively named Pond A, B, and C. These ponds are designed to clean, treat the water, and then release it in what we call a pre-development condition to either the Stony Creek or the Eagle Creek watershed. And we monitor that regularly with academic groups in the campus. So ultimately, the idea is that a salmon spawning at the bottom of the hill has no idea there's 10,000 people living above them. That water feels, looks, tastes the same as it would. And it's become a bit of an indicator for sustainable success in the environmental success in the community. Further to that, we adopted Canada's first green building guidelines, which ultimately became Canada's first green building requirements that are endorsed and enshrined in the zoning bylaw from the city of Burnaby in this community. Ultimately, we started referencing ourselves to LEED because that was the only green building standard at the time. We now have our own in-house green building requirements that meet the needs of the community. Any developer that builds to these green building requirements and also chooses to certify to a standard like LEED for their own marketing or other reasons, typically achieve LEED Gold on these buildings. So we're comfortable with those standards. And ultimately, those standards have been developed in close connection with market developers in the Lower Mainland to ensure that they can deliver these sustainability objectives and these green building objectives and still make their traditional developers profit. So ultimately, the cost of construction is very similar or within 1 or 2% of traditional cost of construction. So typically, we're looking at enhanced window quality, enhanced indoor air quality, highly advanced energy performance, but primarily through envelope treatments rather than expensive delivery systems. And that's all online at UniverCity.ca. You can download our green building guidelines and requirements because I don't have time to go through it here. But again, this is another one of those places where when we, the SFU Community Trust, builds a building that's a community asset, we choose to experiment and seek higher standards than we do of our developers so that we can understand the costs, the constructability, and the delivery of these buildings. So for example, when we built the childcare building, we were pursuing the living building standard, which means this is ultimately an off-grid building from a water and energy point of view. So manages its own black water on site, treats its own black and gray water, reuses the gray water on site, produces 100% of its own annual energy needs through its solar thermal system, and is constructed out of materials that really have no deleterious impact on the environment. The challenge in a building like this, and we always try to set challenge for ourselves, is we want to achieve this standard, in this case, the living building standard. But we do so on a budget that is typically aligned to our green building requirements. So to us, that's a cost neutral building. So the challenge in this building was building a cost neutral living building. At the end of the day, we were not able to succeed. We received all of the certifications of the Living Building Challenge, including the gray water, the black water, all of the materials challenges, and the energy efficiency requirement challenges. The only thing we're unable to meet was the energy production because the solar thermal hasn't been as successful as hoped. We're running about 80% of the total building energy produced by the solar thermal. So we're continuing that model as we move ahead on this project that's currently under construction. So this is a 90-unit project that is being built for graduate students and graduate students with children. But rather than in the student res component of Simon Fraser University, we felt these students would be more at home in the community component, essentially across the street from the childcare, kitty corner to the public elementary school, and 1 block away from the commercial high street would be the best place for families with children that would be spending, anywhere between 2 and 4 years at the university to live and gather. So the objective here, again, was on a standard construction cost pro forma to deliver a passive house project. We're now 60% through construction on the project. We are on budget, we are on time. again, we will not achieve full passive house certification. When we did a lot of the energy modeling and the cost modeling, we realized that the below grade parkade, so we have one level of below grade parkade, would have required significant and expensive insulation under the footings, around the concrete slab structure, and the insulation of the elevator core and the stairwells, which in our climate in BC doesn't make a lot of sense and would have been a total project cost of about $290,000 of additional expenses to increase our energy performance by about 1.4%. So we felt that was not worth the cost of pursuing full passive house certification. So essentially anything in this building above the parkade grade would meet passive house certification if we could do a partial certification, but otherwise we can't meet the full certification. This environment and sustainability component also, and I'll speak to this if you join in the lecture next month, looks at how we configure spaces to be smaller for affordability and for efficiency, but then how to create communal and active spaces within a building to build community within each building we do. Energy efficiency has become a big component in British Columbia, and there's significant building code changes requiring really high energy efficiency. So you either have to do that through the building envelope, sometimes at great cost or challenge, or to do it at a neighborhood scale. So this building that you see rendered here is again about 75% complete in construction. It will be Canada's largest community biomass energy facility. In partnership with Simon Fraser University, it will also power the entire base load of Simon Fraser University, representing a total GHG or carbon drop in the community, in our community versus our energy efficiency requirements, about 60% across the mountaintop, a total carbon reduction of 80%, noting that the majority of the SFU campus buildings were built in the 70s and early 80s. So a significant carbon footprint reduction. This will be using waste wood material and bioenergy material. So this is biomaterial that would otherwise end up in landfill. So we're not using an expensive pelletized or cleaned product. This is a very robust industrial facility that can take wet wood, contaminated wood, or construction materials, for example, that have nails or paint. So it's looking at a second stream source, and therefore you get a very high energy performance credit. So how has this been successful from an economic perspective? Well, the first important thing is that at the outset, we decided that the economy or the university would be supported by the revenues through an endowment fund. So it's very clear that the money earned in this project should not go to general campus use, but would be clearly demarcated in an endowment fund for teaching and research. So the money earned can only be used for teaching and research. The endowment generation is an estimated $170 million. To date, we've generated $95 million. It's actually about $101 million. This was last year, but we've generated about $101 million in revenue that goes back to the university and the endowment fund. And ultimately, it's a leveraging fund, right? So for every $1 million we've given to the endowment fund, the university has been able to leverage that approximately 7 times. Because really what it allows the university to do is fund all of those research and academic advancement programs that smaller or larger economic generators are not interested in. So you take a company like Alcan or 3M, they want to see progressive results out of 1 or 2 years worth of graduate and undergraduate work and studies. So this helps fund that first and second year research that produces the results and then allows the university to go out and attract larger funding opportunities. So it's been a very successful program. As you can see, it's supported 229 students, 39 undergraduate, 79 master's students, 80 PhD students. It's produced 500 publications, and it continues to attract more and more investment partners in the academics of the university. So how are homes at university doing, noting that they are, as noted, leasehold, that they are all higher density forms of development. We have no single family homes, yet we have about 40% of our homes occupied by families. So what we see here, 2017 versus 2018 assessments, is we're tracking an increase in value of homes and percentage change that is similar to comparable neighborhoods in Burnaby. So 16% year-over-year growth in revenue. That means people that are buying a home at university are seeing the growth in their equity that matches elsewhere in Burnaby. But at a price point that is competitive or lower than elsewhere in the city of Burnaby. And part of that is A, the density, B, largely wood frame construction, and C, the fact that there is a slight discount due to the leasehold leasehold sale of parcels. Another part of the economy for us is long-term assets. So we have constructed 3 high street buildings, which are mixed-use commercial, residential, and office buildings. And ultimately, there will be 4. We're just starting the design and delivery process of our 4th building. At the end of the day, we'll have about 200,000 square feet of commercial, retail, and office space. The goal here is for us, the SFU Community Trust, to continue to own that in perpetuity as long-term assets that once the lease of the last development parcel is done, the university will continue to see asset value coming out of the UniverCity community and continued growth and contribution to the endowment fund. And that part of that conversation is, how do we ensure that these assets have value and long-term value and success? So while many people at the start of the day, when we solicited community support, were like, oh, we need to have local businesses, it has to be all grassroots businesses, we found that was a recipe for failure, quite frankly, able to attract. When you're a young, new community building vacant retail space with not a lot of residents living nearby, if you attract small local businesses without name brand recognition, you're probably trying to attract the businesses that are least likely to survive the first 5 years of business as they're trying to grow their clientele and the developer is trying to grow a community. So what we found is a very careful curation of the community by working with the community and community members to understand who are those mainstream vendors that will make the community go on day one and have the 5 years of a progressive lease program. And so it is looking at, okay, so do we have a Starbucks as our local corner coffee shop? You know, a lot of people like, no, we don't want that. But then looking at the university and saying, can we do it as a franchise Starbucks that is owned by the university, so the university benefits from the revenue generation out of this Starbucks outlet? And so that was the case in this particular situation. We've also done the same with our fast food hamburger location, being A&W. A&W Canada is owned and operated in North Vancouver, BC. And again, is a corporate store that is owned in North Vancouver. So there's that story of, yes, we are looking at large national, multinational companies, but they have a tie back to the retailers. What we've noticed is that our small, locally based owned and operated retailers that may have initially resisted having some of these larger players come in have had an increase in sales. Their progressive rents have increased over time to market rents because they've been able to gain the audience that has come to our retail high street because they saw there was a Starbucks, or they saw there was a Tim Hortons, or they saw there was an A&W, and realized, hey, there's also a cool sushi shop, there's a really great pizza restaurant, there's a really good convenience store, et cetera, et cetera. And so they've worked in tandem to help each other become more successful. Education is important, obviously, because of the ties to the university, but also because as a growing family-driven community, there's a need for educational facilities. So a big surprise to everybody about 7 years into the project was the number of families that were making this a full-time home. So at this point in time, we have about 40% of our homes are occupied with families with young children. When the school district, the Burnaby School District ran this community through their demographic models, it showed that they wouldn't have enough students to fill an elementary school until we were near build out, so 2022 or so. In about 2014, we were already at a level that could almost accommodate an elementary school, and we certainly knew that by 2017, we would be able to fill almost a full non-annex base, but a full-size elementary school. So the pressure was on to the school district to deliver a school in a timely manner that would support the growing needs and help them understand the changing demographics of homes in Burnaby, people willing to live in smaller homes, to be closer to town centers, to be in walkable communities, rather than in long distance, long commute suburban communities. This is also supported by the large ethnic composition of UniverCity, as well as the Lower Mainland in general, with a lot of immigrants. growing up in smaller footprint homes and being happy and satisfied in that environment. And so again, partnerships, working with the school district to realize we could provide them with the land to build the elementary school at no charge, to realize that we could help seed the early construction of the school as long as they met higher green building performance requirements. We were able to take $1 million and contribute to that, to the project. Working with the city of Burnaby to realize that schools close at 3:30 in the afternoon, and there's no reason that this school should close at 3:30, and that we could establish classrooms and community rooms on the east wing of the school tied to the gymnasium that could also serve as the community center for the school. So upgrades to those facilities were implemented, and the city of Burnaby also contributed $1 million to the project. All of that was waived in front of the school district, saying that money and this land is only available to you if you are able to open the school within 3 years of a set date. So that was agreed to through that partnership agreement. Ultimately, University Highlands Elementary School was opened. And interestingly, 3 years later, we just finished, or 4 years later, we just finished an 8-classroom expansion. So it's now one of the largest elementary schools in the city of Burnaby. It's also a LEED Gold certified school. It's also a BC Hydro solar demonstration project. So lots of learning and education happens here. Furthermore, it's partnered with the Faculty of Education at the university and works with innovative curriculum delivery. We also do a lot of external education. So what I'm doing today with you folks, in non-COVID times, we run typically, or have typically, interest from about 20 or 25 tour groups a year from around the world to see what we're doing in terms of either sustainable development or community development, or just master planning and campus development. And we also have a lot of research projects happening. So the partnership I mentioned between the elementary school and the Faculty of Education, same with the childcare, the partnerships with the Faculty of Early Childhood Education, bring a lot of research dollars to the fit out of those childcare facilities that we run, and other comprehensive educational programs. And so really we can just take a look at where we're at now at UniverCity and how it's been a success and the challenges that we have faced getting us there. So really it's from, in the last 3 or 4 years, we've shifted from building buildings to building communities, as we only have 3 development sites remaining at UniverCity. So the first thing that we realized over time is that we needed to change our form. Our original zoning from the city of Burnaby allowed 1.7 FAR, 10 stories, as a monolithic form of development for the entire site. We realized that we had narrower sites, we had steep sites, we had flatter sites on the old parking lots that could really accommodate a different variety of development forms. And those different forms of development also suit people in all stages of life and with a different variety of expectations for their housing. So we really looked at the notion of different forms for different folks. And so we re-envisioned 5 years into the project, the entire zoning neighborhood, and said, what if we averaged or flattened the zoning across the community at 1.7 FAR, but if we divided our community into 4 distinct neighborhoods, could we have neighborhoods as high as 2.5 FAR and neighborhoods as low as 1.0 FAR, so that we had a total gross average of 1.7 FAR in the community and a maximum building height of 20 stories. This was supported by the city of Burnaby through a comprehensive rezoning and the associated public process. So now we have, for example, high-rise developments on our narrow external sites facing the North Shore Mountains in downtown Vancouver. They fit very well into steeply sloping sites with smaller site footprints and really appeal to, in some ways, a higher end audience, also young professionals, and also investors. We have several, about 35% of the housing stock and a large majority of it in our high-rise forms are in the investor community. And we find those aren't dark sky investor units, meaning people are living in them. There's an active rental market primarily with SFU students that want to live on campus but don't want to have a student res experience. They want to have that freedom of an apartment living environment. Mid-rise is our predominant form of development. This here, in this case, is a mixed-use building on our high street, where it's 5 stories of residential over 1 story, and with the slope of the site, 2 stories of commercial, retail, and office space. Green roofs, as you can see, are commonplace at UniverCity to support rainwater management and to provide green respite for the people that live in the homes. And the mid-rise homes are a really diverse housing type for us in that they attract anywhere from first-time homebuyer singles to aging in place in Burnaby, senior citizens, to young families with children that prefer living on a single floor versus a multi-story, say, townhouse form of development. So this is our predominant form of development and can also be delivered at really good value. So it's probably our most cost-effective form of housing. Developers build it because they can produce it reasonably quickly, have very good returns on their investment, and have a very quick sellout rate. And then low rise. So we have quite a bit of low rise housing burgeoning in our south neighborhood, which is the home of the old parking lots because they're flatter sites, they're south facing sites. They'll have a new neighborhood park associated with them. So what we call low rise is different than what a lot of people call low rise. It's typically stuff that's 0.9 to 1.2 FAR, and it's typically stacked townhouse. So looking at this building, the Rise building in this case, it looks like a condominium building, but what we actually have here is a courtyard building where there's an internal courtyard and entrances from the courtyard to the upper level buildings, entrances from the street to the lower level homes, and these are ultimately 2/2 stacked townhouses. So these are all 2-level townhouse units, the ground level units having some form of terrace garden, and the top floor units, as you can see by the balconies, having rooftop gardens and open space. This particular building, market building, sold to the marketplace, is occupied by about 75% families with children. And then we do have townhomes, and typically these are 3-story townhouses, fairly tight footprint, a traditional townhouse form. Usually below grade parking. We have a few garages where grades don't work well for below grade parking, but we like to keep those cars off the streets and not have front doors of our houses feeling like garage doors. So typically the townhouse form is a fairly traditional form of development. So ultimately, you know, the plan for UniverCity is really a livable, walkable, sustainable community on Burnaby Mountain. But on top of that, and what the university would continue to say is it's a marketable community. So developers are building fairly conventional housing types using upgraded green building standards. Those more expensive components of green building standards, we're helping them achieve. So by delivery of the district energy utility, those developers are showing up and they're given a performance standard for their building envelope, which is nowhere near as high as a passive house building envelope standard. And is somewhere in the middle of a baseline code building. But then when they couple that performance standard with an energy transfer station that is provided by the district energy utility and a 95% efficient energy delivery system that is rated by the province as low carbon, they're able to achieve their energy performance at a cost that is pretty much neutral to conventional electric baseboards in a standard insulated home. The stormwater management components or the water management components typically seem expensive if developers are building large on-site storage facilities. But all we're requiring the developers to do is basically manage the 1-year storm. So the worst possible storm that can happen on Burnaby Mountain in 1 year, which typically leads to a prefabricated cistern that can go somewhere in the parkade footprint. And basically the developer's response then is to, whenever possible, have infiltrative landscapes, but when not possible, to direct their drains and scuppers to their cistern. That cistern fills up, has an outflow, and then it goes to the UniverCity, which ultimately is the city's infrastructure. So it goes into a swale, which goes into a pond. Those costs are invisible to the developer. The developer simply sees that storm connection and attaches their cistern to that connection. So when you start having these densities and the scale to build these community infrastructure systems, they don't actually cost the developers more, they save the developer money. And in the long term, when you look at the energy systems, they save the strata's money as well, because the strata ownership fee or the strata monthly fees are less, because they're not looking at replacing hot water boilers every 5 years. They're not looking at replacing furnaces or other peak load systems every 5 to 10 years, because those components are not in the building, they're in the energy center. And the delivery of that energy is through an energy transfer station, which is also owned by the energy utility company. So the only infrastructure in the building for domestic hot water and all of the space heating and cooling needs of the building is ultimately the piping. of those systems, which rarely fail. So it's really all the costly infrastructure is owned by the utility and is recovered through utility rates that are about 4% higher than conventional BC, 4 to 7% higher than conventional BC hydro utility rates. But when buildings are running on typical 35% more efficient, what the strata owner looks at is how much does this home cost me to operate in a month? And those monthly costs are same as or lower than an equivalent condominium that is built to code standards down the hill from us. So we're continually looking at, can the developer market this story? Green housing, healthier indoor environments, low carbon footprint, energy efficient systems, similar or lower operating costs than conventional housing or similar housing elsewhere. And can the developer make, anywhere between 23 and 26% profit on the project? So that's always been the objective. And then to continue to attract people by ensuring that we have the retail and commercial amenities nearby that attract communities. So there's not a lot of communities in Vancouver, in the Lower Mainland, where students have access to a leading edge elementary school that gets top level research support and annuity. Retail environment where they're an integrated part in selecting the success of those retailers, dental, healthcare facilities provided because our community has the size that is now generated those operators within the community. So we have a walk-in clinic, holistic health clinic, dental facilities, soon to have physio and massage facilities within the community. Et cetera, et cetera. So there's the attractive component that adds value to the community. And so finally, I'll just take you through a little bit of a tour here of some of those things that don't show up in the stats, really don't show up in the requirements, and have turned out to be successes or things that the community speaks about. So one is we really have one street that links the entire community, and that street disappears into underground parkade. So the real movement through the community is through the public realm and the pedestrian network. And what we've learned over time is that sidewalks are great. Everybody likes sidewalks. But what this community really likes is in between the strata lots, if we can slide in these pedestrian networks that are sort of the sneaky favorites. They're gravel, they're a more natural environment, they're low maintenance, there's no expectation to shovel them in the winter time. They become these moments in the forest that connect the community to the space that they're living in. Again, numbers, 10,000 people when we're done, is enough to finally attract and have transit and mobility options. So we find that about 45% of our community takes transit to work, and about 30% of our community, or 35%, is directly affiliated with the university. So about 80% of our community is using sustainable transportation, whether they're walking to the university or they're taking transit, because it's there, it's frequent service. We have transit to the SkyTrain station running every 3 minutes at peak periods, and it's about a 12-minute ride down to the SkyTrain station. Evo, Moto, and two other names are escaping me, car share companies have located immediately in the community. We have over 20 cars available to the community at any time, and about 19% of our community are members of an auto network of some sort. Average car ownership subsequently in our community is 0.9, so 0.9 cars per household. Interesting, the city of Burnaby's average is 2.7, and their other high density communities is around 2.0, so significantly managing that. And then keeping things like sustainability visual helps tell the story and helps connect the community to it. And then really continually surveying the community of what do you want in your parks? What do you want in your recreational space? And being able to go or look outside the box. So for example, in our vacant development sites and our open lands, we work with the community to build, in this case for $15,000, and it had 9 years of life, a dirt jump facility for the community, because that's the kind of features they're looking for in a neighborhood. And then we do, with every developer, we try to integrate a public art component. So every developer pays $1 per square foot towards a public art fund, and they become an invested part of that public art conversation and sit on our academic and developer jury process and work to attract young artists in BC to give them their first public commissions. And so we've done 6 successful projects and continue to do that with every development as we move forward. And then allowing spaces just to become. So trying not to overprogram spaces, and allow surprises to happen in the forest, in the natural environment. And then creating a real mix of semi-public and semi-private spaces is important, because there is that Jane Jacobs idea of eyes on the street, and families here, really not being too idealist, do leave their doors unlocked. But there's certainly value to those spaces that are also semi-private, those spaces where community becomes even smaller. So there's neighborhood and then community, and then there's sort of that family cycle that is found in buildings. And we've done several of these courtyard buildings because they really respect those family values of the backyard in a high density environment. And so how do we monitor what's working and what isn't working? One of the big things, we hire the Mistel research group every 2 years to do a community survey. So our 2018 and 2020 are also on our website now. This is an older slide. And we're asking them all of those demographic questions we want to know. You know, what do you like about this place? What are your priorities? And then we work with the city of Burnaby to actually change zoning or other requirements as we learn more about these. And what is the incidence of the household associated with SFU? Where do these people live? How do they get to work? And what changes can we make? So by doing this every 2 years, we're allowed to have a really proactive conversation with the community. And we also learn the things that they don't like. You know, we don't like gates and strata lots. Well, why are those gates and strata lots? And can we work with the strata to remove those gates and allow those flow through areas to be more public? Certain buildings wanting to have more than one parking stall. You know, why is that? What is the need that we're missing or needing to address? You know, a few years ago, we need to have more family-oriented housing, and understanding, holy crap, over 40% of our households are families. We need to work on zoning more mid-rise and ground-oriented stacked townhouses. Those kinds of things allow us to continue to adjust to the community. And then finally, it's all about the partners. So as noted, the school wouldn't have opened without the support of Simon Fraser University, the city of Burnaby, and the school district. We continue to share our successes with the city of Burnaby. Theirs are as much as our successes are. So planning awards, et cetera, are always done in conjunction with the city, not just by ourselves. And then our partners throughout the community, whether it be the childcare providers or the retailers, trying to understand their needs. Do they need help with rent in this COVID period? That's an important conversation. What can we do to make this an ongoing success, not now, but 20 years from now? And then finally, working on future proofing. What is the future of UniverCity? And so something getting a lot of press lately is our work with TransLink to eliminate the very expensive operations of articulated buses for the campus community and our community up and down the mountain, and replacing that within the next 2 years with a high-speed gondola system. And these kinds of questions can be asked and can be discussed openly, because we've created that conversational atmosphere with our politicians, with our stakeholders, with the local transit authority, and with the community, and then that engagement with the university to realize that we could further reduce carbon emissions of transportation on campus by another 80%. We can increase the efficiency of delivery, a 6-minute ride to and from the mountain with no queuing at the bottom of the mountain, direct at-grade connection to SkyTrain. And then we can reallocate over $7 million worth of articulated, $17 million worth of articulated buses to areas in the Lower Mainland that need to move towards a rapid bus system. So all of these ideas start as ideas and become realities. And so that's just a slide of the gondola system. And then what is the next chapter? So is there life after university? And someone's just asked a question in terms of learning with regards to the Biomass Community Center. How is university able to fund it, and where is the biomass coming from? So this is a great conversation about the future and about partnerships. So we realized that we, nor the university, are energy providers. And our community may not accept us being an energy provider, but rather they would want a public utility, or a utility that is certified through the BC Utilities Community or BC Utilities Commission on an annual basis through a public venue. So what we did is we realized that we could look at neighborhood energy as an ability to lower costs and make connections. So we put together an RFP, a request for proposals, to private sector energy providers that would be willing to run a BCUC certified public utility for the neighborhood that would be within 5 to 10% of conventional energy and would ensure energy use reduction in buildings by 30%. We had applications from 4 providers, ultimately selected Corix Energy Services to run the utility. So they wholly own, run, and deliver the energy utility at no cost to us or to the university. So this is a partnership that is, you know, the partnership being us providing them the customer base and the building base and the requirement, and then Corix Energy taking on that risk with the long-term revenue. Whereas the biomass coming from, as noted, it's diversion from landfill, largely diversion from landfill construction waste that will be trucked up to the facility once a week. And the carbon numbers do look at that trucking footprint as well. And so can we do more? You know, the question is yes. SFU has additional parking lots and additional blank space. You know, can we continue this model and look at building a living UniverCity? We've done a bunch of academic work on this. You know, part of it seems probable, part of it seems impossible, but it really provides us the opportunity to continue to explore. So with that, I think I'm largely at time. If you want to know more, you can ask me questions via email, and that will be sent out to you. We also have a book called Building Community that just came out last year that's available, I believe, on Amazon. So lots of opportunities to learn more.
Okay, that was amazing. Thank you, Dale, for sharing all of that great information with us. Many of the topics that Dale touched on today will be delved into in more detail in some of the upcoming presentations. We have one presentation every Wednesday at 11 a.m. until October 7th. So please check out the website to see what else is coming. Before everyone leaves, I just wanted to mention that the Biosphere Institute has been working with Dr. Jill Budefeld, a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Alberta, and she's helping us to analyze the effectiveness of this webinar series. It can be really difficult to measure success and learning, and we hope that you will help us by completing the very short 5-minute survey that pops up at the end of the webinar when you close down. And this will allow us to support our capacity to secure funding and continue this kind of work into the future. So as I say, please everyone participate, and don't forget to fill out your email at the end of the survey, because every entrance will have the opportunity to win a portable Anchor solar charger. So thank you so much for helping with that. And finally, next week we have Frank Crawford from Passive House Alberta, who will be running an open question and answer session. He's going to also provide a little bit of information on the embodied carbon within buildings, again, which Dale sort of mentioned earlier in his presentation. And finally, please don't forget to check out the online trade showcase, which will be going live in the next 24 hours, which should help you learn about leading edge energy efficient products, their retailers, and contractors within the community that can help you access those resources. So as I say, in the next 24 hours, that will be going live. So please go check out our upcoming webinars. Have a look at the showcase. And once again, thank you, Dale, so much for your presentation. A recording will be available shortly on the Biosphere Sustainable Building Summit website. So if you want to review anything that Dale covered today, you're more than welcome to do that, and I will notify everyone who attended when that goes live. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and I really hope to see you next week.